Hello there, everyone. Welcome back to the class, both to new and long-time students and lovers of history. This is History with Sai here today to discuss with you our next part of our topic, which is Charles's personal rule, or as some historians like to call it, the 11-year tyranny. Now, this is from 1629 to 1638. This is the first part in our exploration into this time period during our Stuarts' Britain. If you haven't caught up on the history up to this point during Charles's reign, do check out our previous videos on the topic where we discuss what his monarchical rule was like from 1625 onwards. With all that said, notepads and pens at the ready, and let us begin. So, as we left in our last point, Charles has dissolved Parliament, ruling as a single monarch over the people. He's not using Parliament at all. And so, in this video, we're going to see what exactly Charles has done, what exactly his reforms are, and any opposition that remains that still tries to resist him as he rules as one single monarch over the nation. First off, though, it's important at this point we start bringing in some primary sources that we can look at and understand more about the past. Because again, a lot of this history comes from our primary sources. Again, these are the remnants, the fragments of the past that we have access to. And they give us a sense of an idea of what exactly was happening in Charles's rule at this time. So I have one here for you, a pamphlet that came out during his personal rule. So just quickly pause the video for yourself and have a look exactly what's in this image. Before we go into detail, do you recognize any key figures in this? And really take note of what exactly it is that are on these dishes that are being presented to eat. There we are. So hopefully you've had a good look at that and have had a thought for yourself. Maybe made some notes down of this primary source. Perhaps you would have recognized that the Bishop of Canterbury looks quite a fair bit about our Bishop of London, William Laud. And you can see in the middle, that is most prominent on the middle disc, the thing he's being presented to eat are ears. And this is quite peculiar, isn't it? Like, why is he being presented ears to eat? Well, that's a key thing we need to come back and understand. We don't currently know the context, and so it's important we go forward to learn what that context is, and then revisit this source and understand a bit more about it later in our lesson. So, what exactly was the situation by 1629? Well, as we should remember, Charles had very much fallen out with Parliament and he had dissolved them. And this is the point of high tension. However, he had some justification for doing this. He wasn't seen as an outright tyrant by many in the country at this point. After all, leaders who had done this to him had forcefully passed a free resolution. They disgraced the practice of the monarchy and of parliament, and he seemed quite just, using his divine right of kings to imprison them, especially since they had not apologized for what they had done. Two of them eventually did, but one of them, Sir John Eliot, still refused to do so. He was quite staunch in his belief, and so he remained in the Tower of London. He would eventually die in 1632. So Charles began a period of personal rule without Parliament's involvement in any way. Now, this wasn't really out of nowhere. Many monarchs had done this before, and it was somewhat common for the monarchy to actually have periods of ruling without Parliament at all. And so it's actually worth noting as well, his own father, James I, done similar, ruling for 7 years between 1614 and 1621 without any essential participation from Parliament at all. Unlike our Parliament today, government can be done without it in this time period. And if Charles could find the money he needed to govern, then he actually had no need of Parliament at all. It's hard to say right away that Charles was attempting to establish an absolute monarchy at all. Perhaps he could simply just govern without Parliament, and things actually could even be better, like how his father James had shown in that period during his rule. Let's find out. So first we have Charles' advisors. Throughout the 1630s, Charles has three primary advisors that he relies on. Charles, after all, was a conscientious king, unlike his father, who left a lot of decisions to the advisors. Charles actually attended the meetings regularly and ensured his decisions were understood and acted upon. He spent many hours each day on the business of government. After the death of Buckingham George Villiers, Charles had never again allowed any advisor to truly get close to him. Notwithstanding, though, was his own wife, Henrietta Maria, who provided her own personal advice as his wife to him. She was still openly practicing her belief in Catholicism in London's royal court, and she had more Catholics become part of the Privy Council. Some would say her advice was misguided, and maybe not necessarily the best person to be asking for political advice, considering her roots in the French monarchy and with Catholicism, the tensions that would bring to the Protestant gentry in England. But he also had two political advisors that he put a lot of faith in as well. One of them, as we've already encountered, was William Laud, the Bishop of London. And as time goes on, he eventually raises him to the Archbishop of Canterbury. And so, with that, he of course grants him further control of the Church of England, with Wentworth creating a Star Chamber, a prerogative court that he could use to enforce the changes and reforms he wanted to bring to religion in the country. We'll say more about that shortly. The other advisor we had was Sir Thomas Wentworth, a man who was also a member of the Privy Council, and he focused predominantly in the north of England and in Ireland, leaving the church entirely under law's control. Both of the men, they believed in what's called a thorough handling of matters, although these were not always popular with many people in the country. But they certainly insisted on a massive oversight and a massive amount of control, as their rules dictated them to have through the power that Charles had granted them. It's worth noting as well, these prerogative courts that Lord set up, they were law courts that dealt with cases related to the king's authority, and they really were quite efficient and competently staffed. But they were resented because the judgments essentially depended on doing whatever was best for the king. There's a clear one-sided nature towards these courts that must be addressed as we go through our contextual understanding here. The second thing to look at are Charles's own financial actions. After all, money was a massive reason why Charles had disagreed and fallen out with Parliament. Without Parliament, Charles had to raise money by other means to secure the sufficient income he needed. After all, if he couldn't do this, then he probably would need to call Parliament to grant him the subsidies instead. So the first thing Charles did was make peace with the Catholic country of Spain. He signed the Treaty of Madrid in 1630, which therefore instantly cut the annual spending on war from £500,000 right down to 70,000 for the rest of the 1630s. Charles then attempted to maximize his income by reorganizing the traditional sources of revenue of the king. He increased rents on crown lands, and fines were issued to illegal enclosures or buildings built on royal land or in royal forest. To further achieve this, he also sold monopoly licenses, something James had done, and which has been banned by law in 1624. Monopolies were sold by the king and gave an individual or company the sole right to produce and sell certain products. However, they were open to abuse. For instance, in 1634, a group of Catholic courtiers gained a monopoly on soap production by claiming their product washed whiter. This became a popish scandal. We've already touched before about Protestants' wariness towards Catholics, and so for them to have control of soap production rather than the Protestants themselves created more tension on religious lines. Thirdly, Charles continued to collect tonnage and poundage and impositions, another kind of custom tax. All of these innovations he was doing were already variations on previous money making methods, but they did succeed in bringing in the much needed cash that he needed for his monarchy. He also began to collect ship money annually in 1634 for the navy. Ship money was a clear demand that people of each country must contribute towards the navy. It was usually collected once or twice during each monarch's reign, but Charles had changed it by making it collectible every single year. 1634 was the first time, but when he did it again in 1635 and then again in 1636, people realized that he had turned it into an annual tax. This was of serious concern for many in the country, for if the king could depend on a regular income, it was unlikely he would ever have to call Parliament again. This meant he was leaning more towards the tyrannical rule for never needing to get Parliament, where he could keep forcing payment of money via this ship money instead. Then we also had the third reforms, which came through Law's religious policies. As we know, religion was a deeply contentious issue for many in this country. Charles's policies in the Church of England were characterized by the promotion of Arminians like William Laud, and as we said before, promoting him to the Archbishop of Canterbury in 1633 expanded the reforms even further and meant Arminianism was clearly becoming the main form of Protestantism rather than Puritanism that had been previously desired by many in the gentry. Laud in particular called for unity through uniformity, which is where he ensured all bishops did as he and Charles desired to achieve the belief in beauty through holiness. This meant strict obedience and adherence to the rules of the church and a greater focus on catechisms. So in 1629, these catechisms were a set of fixed questions and answers that set out the key ideas and creed of the Church of England. In 1629, the catechisms replaced sermons on Sunday, bowing during services, and also using a Laud-approved prayer book. These were clear examples of how Laud and Charles wanted to bring back ceremony, ritual, and authority into the Church of England, even though doing such things, like beauty through holiness, were clearly at odds with how many Puritans felt the direction the Church should go. The Puritans had wanted a more individual, personal, Bible-based worship with the Word of God front and center. Seeing the focus on beautiful ceremonies and caskets and moving the altar, this was all very alien to them, and in their eyes was disgraceful in the eyes of God as well. Biggest thing as well that happened in the churches was moving the altar to the east end of the church, and therefore making communion more sacrificial, which very much resembled how Catholic services were practiced, not how the Protestant services for Puritans have been established for many decades now. Ministers who refused or resisted were brought to the prerogative court, such as the High Court of Commission, and were deprived of their livings. Although we didn't initially see a lot of the clergy forced out of the church, around 100 did leave England to go to Puritan colonies in America instead. After all, the policies of decorating the churches, encouraging music, and of course, as we said, moving the communion table away from the centre of the church reminded everyone of a high Catholic church. But Charles and Laud didn't care for this. These policies established order and beauty in their eyes. However, many people did not share this same view and felt the restrictions on preaching in favor of learning the catechism left people ignorant and even more superstitious. All these changes were controversial and, of course, were seen as a direct attack on their own Protestant faith. It did not help further that Laud then insisted on reissuing the Book of Sports in 1633, which encouraged recreation like archery, dancing, and leapings on a Sunday. The Sunday, though, was a day of a Sabbath, a rest day, and so this worried people that the result was a creation of a united group of opposition to the king's religious policies who believed in and feared a return to Catholicism. The result of this was the creation of a united group in opposition to the king's religious policies, who believed in and feared a return to Catholicism. The fact that Laud was a strong supporter of the divine right of monarchs, which Charles was practicing now, was also a grand concern for the people. From all of these reforms and changes, opposition towards the monarchy began to increase throughout the 1630s. The Laudian reforms outraged the Puritans and the gentry class above all. They were losing money and they feared a transition to Catholicism Laud's reforms were bringing upon them. But it was actually John Hampden, a Buckinghamshire gentleman, who started the more publicised actions of resistance. He famously refused to pay ship money in 1636 and legally challenged the right of the king to levy it, taking himself to court. However, this prerogative court was of course already in Charles's favour, and they voted 7-5 to continue persecuting Hampden. Hampden's challenge was publicised, and many people began to also resist the collecting of ship money, leading to a reduce of 20% in gains. Puritan writers like William Prim, Henry Burton, and John Baswick began producing whole pamphlets against the Laudian regimes. We should remember one I showed you at the very start of this video. That is where this came from. It was a famous pamphlet that was seen to mock the actions of the Star Chamber, mock the actions of Laud, and everything that he was doing. You may remember, though, I pointed out were dishes of ears that were being given to Laud and his compatriots. This is because Star Chamber went after these free men and found them guilty, the educated men of the gentry class, and they branded their cheeks and cut off their ears. This, of course, became a brutal and notorious punishment because it was carried out in front of a public, horrified crowd, most of whom had been sympathetic towards the free men. This, of course, rather than dissuaded people from resisting, only increased fear and resentment of Catholicism and Laud's own actions, as did concerns about the absolute monarchy of things like the Star Chamber had appeared to be making possible. And so, yes, I want to take us back to this image now. This wasn't a random image that had come up for fun in the pamphlets at this time. This was a clear, publicized act of resistance against the Laudian reforms and against the absolutist action that were being carried out in the name of Charles I. However, despite these actions, there's very little the resistance could actually do. Again, yes, they could publish these pamphlets and publish these images to try and dissuade or disgrace or mock Laud and his reforms. But resistance seemed futile. After all, the main three, Prim, Burton, and Bastwick, they had all been persecuted for what they had done. Anyone else who did try could either lose their jobs, especially in the clergy, or were brought before that prerogative court to also receive punishments by judges loyal to the king. The government also further censored books and pamphlets to ensure it was difficult to publish anti-Laud and anti-Charles materials, much like this one we have here on the screen. Without Parliament to voice the concerns of the people and with an effective financial foundation, personal rule seemed very likely to continue. But that's just the first part in this tale. There is still much more to learn on this time point. For instance, we focused a lot on England and especially around the actions in London here where Laud and Charles are based. But what about the rest of the kingdom? After all, England is not the only part of the kingdom Charles rules over here. We have Scotland and we have Ireland we have to consider as well, and the actions occurring in their countries. How are they responding to all these reforms that are being brought about? Well, that's the topic for our next video, as we're going to delve deeper into what's going on in the wider kingdom. Because again, we have to understand it's not just one place, one city. And this is an entire nation we're going to be considering here, and that's what we're going to be exploring in our next video. As always, I hope you found these videos useful. I hope you found them insightful. What's one key thing you've learned so far and that you'll find yourself very much engaging with during our studies here on Stuart England? Make sure you comment down below what that is. And of course, check some further reading out that I'll be including in my description box below if you wish to take these studies further. Again, everything I'm doing here is only introductory in nature, and there's always more history to learn. If you have any questions, also let me know as well. And subscribe if you haven't already to make sure you're keeping up to date with our videos and our series as we're going forward. So thank you once again for watching. This has been History with Sire, and thank you for listening.